Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live stream where we're going to be testing out a new model. We're testing out Claude 4.1 Opus today. They only updated Opus. There's no 4.1 Sonnet, unfortunately, because Opus is very expensive. But today we're going to be talking about that. And while we're here, we might as well compare it a little bit to GPT-5. Since I did a video on that on Friday, or did a live stream about that on Friday. And we're going to talk a little bit about which one is better. They are both of them quite good, but in very different ways. And they might require different prompting techniques. They might require uses in different situations. Like there might be a case where for a specific scene, GPT-5 might be more appropriate than 4.1 Opus, or vice versa. There's also, of course, you have to keep in mind the cost. Opus is something like, it's more than 7 times the cost of GPT-5, which is kind of insane. And I gotta just say, before we get into this, like, I was not prepared for the strong opinions that people have about GPT-5. The title that I had for the video for the live stream was something like GPT-5 is the best creative writing model I've tested in a long time, something like that. And I generally agree with that. Like, I think it was a substantial leap forward that I have not seen in a long time. Even in the Claude models have been slight incremental improvements. And this one was just like, compared to the previous GPT models, it was just like, it was absolutely above and beyond what I expected to get out of it. And way better than 4.5 or 4.1 or GPT-4o. Now, I got a lot of pushback on that. And I can only speak from my own experience with my own tests, of course, but I was wondering, like, why are so many people disagreeing with me on this? And I think it came down to maybe 2 things. First, people kind of get into their minds what is good and what isn't, and they sort of, they decide like, oh, the Claude models are the ones for creative writing. And so if I would dare to suggest that that is not the case anymore, I don't know, there's some sort of identity associated with the opinions we've created. I hope to, I like to think that I am better at that for myself. Everyone knows I like the Claude models. They've always been my favorite. And so the fact that I'm saying something contrary to that, I hope is a sign that they are like, that I'm trying to avoid any bias, at least as best as I can. And no human is capable of completely removing bias, but so that's part one. The second thing, though, which I think is more likely, is I have a feeling most people that were commenting and talking about how terrible it was were not using the actual GPT-5. They were using what they got inside of ChatGPT. In my live stream, if you go back and watch it, you'll notice I didn't pull up ChatGPT once. And that is because the version of GPT-5 in ChatGPT is different from the vanilla version of GPT-5. It is totally different. And I tested this and was getting like much smaller outputs and just inferior results with the ChatGPT version. And the reason for this is because the ChatGPT version is tailored for chat, for being more conversational. It is not tailored to be a workhorse, you know? A lot of people use ChatGPT for work, but it is definitely not as good as using an API. A lot of people don't really get this. And in the past, it hasn't mattered that much. I know a lot of my colleagues, like those at Future Fiction Academy, they've been recommending you go straight to the API for years now, literally. And I haven't been as big of an advocate for that, because I didn't think, at least in the past, it didn't matter too much. So I erred on the side of simplicity, which means, yeah, go ahead and use the chatbot. But this is the first time where using ChatGPT, I would say you should not be using ChatGPT if you want to work with GPT-5, because you're not actually getting the same model that I was getting. I was using it through an API. In my case, it's openrouter.ai. You can go there and access the models there. You can also go to OpenAI's own API, which is accessible at platform.openai.com. Go there, make your account, and then and put in $5 to start with, and then just work with the models there, because there's more than one GPT-5 model, and you want to make sure you're using the right one. And I have a feeling a lot of the people who were poo-pooing GPT-5 in my comment section were not doing that. Now, maybe they were, and they just didn't like it, and that's totally fine. There is a certain level of subjectivity to this whole thing. But anyway, let's just get into the tests for Claude 4.1. It's always a little bit difficult to properly test these because of the subjective nature of it. But I'm going to give you my best attempt, especially when comparing it to GPT-5. There are some trends I'll be able to show you. So let me switch to my different view here. All right, so right here I have the results of my tests. I use the same prompts for everything, which is a little bit of a disadvantage, because to get the best results out of a model, you do kind of have to tailor your prompts to that specific model. You have to work with the model enough to kind of figure out how it works, and then tailor your prompts to that model to kind of get better results out of it. But I do try to make my prompts as simple as possible, because what I'm trying to test for is how well do these models work out of the box to give me the results that I want without too much prompting. That's the whole idea. And by the way, hello, Anthony and Florence and Elena. Good to see y'all here. I have Claude 4 Opus here. I have Claude 4.1 Opus here, and I've got GPT-5 here. All with the results that I got out of the same prompts. Let's look first at the logline prompt. And I'm not going to go through all of these, of course, because that would take forever. But just my first impressions looking through these, let's just read the first one here. When a pacifist healer discovers she's the only one who can wield an ancient weapon of mass destruction, she must embrace violence to stop a warmongering emperor who happens to be a patient she just saved from death. This is a kind of story that I've heard before. I haven't read it in fantasy, but I've seen it elsewhere. It's a good story. At least this archetype of a pacifist saving someone, and then that saving someone being a problem that ends up causing more issues. So that's a decent idea right there. And overall, I could say these are pretty good. If we look and compare them to the Claude 4 Opus, these were okay. I would say 4.1 is a minor improvement over it. Minor improvement. And that's my general sense of the last couple of releases from most of the other models out there, is that they are small incremental improvements. Whereas GPT-5 was a pretty big leap, at least compared to other past GPT models. Oh, good to see you, Timu. Says, I don't see myself ever using AI for writing. I'm not here to fight. That's totally fine. But I've injured my leg, so I've been curious to follow the topic. I like your channel, first of all. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. You absolutely don't have to use AI for writing. You can use it for research. You can use it for brainstorming. You can use it for editing. There's lots of different ways to use it. I teach all different ways because I don't judge how people want to use it. And I think it's possible to inject our own creativity at any stage of the process, anytime we're creating something. But anyway, let's get back to it. A young necromancer who abhors death must raise... See, a young necromancer who abhors death. It's not necessarily someone I would say would go into necromancy. But must raise an army of the dead to stop an immortal tyrant whose greatest weapon is granting eternal life to his followers. That's kind of a decent, interesting story. I like that the tyrant has a sort of seemingly amazing power weapon. It's kind of reversed there. So yeah, these aren't bad, certainly. Compared to GPT-5, my general thoughts around the GPT-5 loglines is that they were highly original, but almost to the point of confusion, where it was just like, wait, what's happening here? And like, you would have to really work with the idea a little bit more to make it like actually work as a story. But sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes you need a lot of like randomized elements. You put them all into the story, and you can get something that sounds a lot more interesting and creative. There's an old saying that creativity loves constraint. So here's a creative exercise for you. Go out and get like a random word generator. Don't use AI because it's not actually random. Find a random word generator, generate like 5 different words, and then be like, how do I make a story from this? And your brain will work with that really well. Anyway, that's what I felt like GPT-5 was doing. It created a lot of like almost chaos that sort of related to itself as a story, but then it would require you to really figure out how to make that work. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on the loglines. Outlines. This is one area I was reading through the outline for 4.1 Opus that I was pretty happy with it. I think it was a good outline. It definitely stuck to it stuck to a logical story throughout. It didn't like get too sidetracked. Sometimes the AI will kind of go off in different directions and forget about earlier stuff that had been set up earlier in the story. And this one did a pretty good job of using the instructions that I gave it and the story that I gave it and coming up with something that actually sort of worked within the world building and the plot that I had given it. So I was pretty happy with that. Again, I would say this is a marginal improvement on Claude 4 Opus. There wasn't anything. In fact, in Claude 4 Opus, it actually gave me more detail per chapter. Which is something I might want eventually, but maybe not at first. Claude 4.1 gave me just like a paragraph per chapter, which is fine. Because, you know, I might want to make a lot of changes as I go, and the more content was created for the outline, the more work it would be to change it. So I'm happy with these shorter paragraph crap. Well, I say shorter. These aren't too short, but only having the one paragraph I think is fine. And again, it did a pretty good job of establishing the character in the beginning, and from what I read, did a good job with the inciting incident and everything. It was kind of a different inciting incident. It wasn't just like, oh, we don't like you, so we're going to throw you out of the city, which is what I get a lot with this particular story. The main character, instead, he like stumbles across this whole conspiracy and finds stuff that he shouldn't have found, stumbles in on his father and brother doing something they shouldn't, and they were like, okay, well, now you got to go. And so it was a better story than I've seen in the past. First of all, totally random talk. Thank you for the super chat. I'm happy to answer your question. So they say, random question I have, a front and back cover, but the art style is different and there's a lot to each image. Should what AI should you use to match? So you have a front and a back cover and you want to like blend them together, I assume, around the spine. Photoshop would be the one, because it can easily seamlessly blend those two together, and that's what most cover artists use to create the template for a wraparound cover. And so you're going to want to be knowing how to use the basics of Photoshop anyway. So Michael Sean Comerford says, I'm writing creative nonfiction. I use Atticus and Word. How do I convert from Opus and GPT-5? Convert from Opus? Not sure what you mean by convert from Opus and GPT-5. Are you talking about like moving it to Atticus in Word? I would just copy paste it. That can sometimes introduce some formatting errors, but like that's the way it works sometimes. Aries Mars expresses what is creative nonfiction, memoirs, stuff like that. Okay, we need to make sure we stay on topic here. So if you do have questions, try to keep them on topic. Otherwise, I will get to them at the end of the analysis here, and then from there, if we have time, I can address them. But do try to keep them on topic if you can. All right. So the Beats prompt, I'm probably going to have to just redo this one at some point. They all do a good job with the Beats prompt at this point, as far as I'm concerned. They all give extra details, stuff that I would want it to do. I'm going to be doing a video later on doing scene briefs instead of scene beats. So maybe at that point I will change that prompt to be about scene briefs. But the real kicker is that we want to know about is the basic prose prompt. So let me go here for all three of these models. So starting with for Opus, so what we used to have, I'm going to skip ahead. There's a moment here that is typically a good moment for the writing, where this character Haldred, he's stumbling around looking to get to safety, and he's being pursued by these zombie-like creatures called the Hungry. And it's usually a good moment to kind of like assess how good the writing is. And so if we look at it here, we have Haldred forced himself to look back, though every instinct screamed against it. There, scattered across the darkening wasteland like drops of poison on parchment, moved the Hungry. 24 at least, perhaps more. It was difficult to count when they moved with that distinctive jerky gait, as if their joints had been broken and incorrectly reset. Their gray skin rendered them nearly invisible against the ash-colored rock until they moved, creating a horrifying illusion of the landscape itself coming alive with malevolent purpose. Some crawled on all fours, their humanity stripped away until only base need remained. Others walked upright, but wrong, heads lolling at unnatural angles, arms swinging with too much freedom. They were too close, much too close. Okay, that was Claude 4. If we go to the same moment in Claude 4.1 Opus, behind him, scattered across the darkening wasteland like a plague of locusts, came the Hungry. Haldred Rista glanced over his shoulder, and his heart seized. 24 at least, perhaps more, their forms difficult to distinguish in the failing light. Their gray mottled skin blended with the ash-colored stone and shadows, making them seem to materialize and vanish with each shambling step. But there was no mistaking their jerky, unnatural gait, the way they moved in sudden bursts of speed, followed by moments of eerie stillness, heads cocked as if listening to some sound only they could hear. Their naked bodies showed no concern for the sharp rock or bitter wind, feeling nothing but the endless gnawing need that drove them ever forward. They were too close. They were close, too close. So about the same. As far as I'm concerned, that is about the same, maybe a slight improvement. But if we look at GPT-5, that same moment, he crested a low ridge of shale and dared to look back. The horizon was a jagged seam. Along it, like a scatter of charcoal thrown and caught by a string, the figures moved. The Hungry did not run, not truly. Their motion was something like a stuttered capture in a living frame, jerks and lunges that ate distance in ugly, efficient bursts. They broke apart and reformed without order, gray skin taking the color of stone, of smoke, of the belly of clouds. Even at this distance, even through the haze, the wind lifted, Haldred knew the count by the way his gut closed and his scalp prickled. 24 at least, perhaps more in the troughs where shadows pooled. Too many, too close. Now, I've talked a little bit before about how GPT-5, and really all the GPT models really, have a tendency to go poetic. Sometimes you want it to go poetic, and this is one of those times. This is one case where I think this is substantially better than what Claude was giving me. Claude was just sort of telling me what happens, which is fine. Sometimes that's what you want. Oftentimes, probably most of the time, honestly, that's probably what you want. But in this case, I think that it actually worked better here in GPT-5. Now, this is going to be a matter of taste. It really is. It's going to be a matter of taste. Some people are going to just prefer the way Claude writes it. and that's fine. Or you could go in and punch this up yourself. It's sometimes easier to take something that's a little dull and punch it up than to take something that's like too over the top and rein it back in, right? But that said, like, this is still good. Claude 4.1 Opus is still good. There's a moment later that I think is also a good comparison. Let's see, here it is. Haldred's mind raced through the protocols every citizen of the frontier knew by heart. The gates of Arlden would never open when the hungry were within sight of the walls. It was the first and most sacred law of the survival in the mountain cities. No exceptions, no mercy. So that's not bad, but it is kind of telling us what the policy is. Whereas if we go to what GPT wrote for this section, it said there were rules in Varlin, old rules that had kept the mountain safe when the plains failed its neighbors and the ash years came. There is no gate for the hungry. There is no gate for those who bring them. 100 times he had heard it spoken from the watch balconies, not as a threat, but as a flat ledger line between those who lived and those who fed the dead. He could see, as surely as it were carved in basalt, the measure in the minds of the men at the winches. Distance, speed, the time it took to open the iron and close it again, the number of lives on either side of a threshold. Again, very poetic, but also way more like in the mind of the character, and kind of explaining it from his point of view, and even getting into the actual words spoken by getting into the reasoning behind it. There's just something there that I'm not getting out of 4.1 Opus. And again, that is a matter of taste. And there are going to be times where you want to have the more just like vanilla, unpoetic type of writing. And I need to do more tests to see if I want to actually start using GPT-5 more in my automations and things to actually write my scenes, because sometimes you kind of have to go through and write, 10,000, 20,000 words or so, and do a full edit on that before you really understand where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are, and how much time is it saving you versus how much time are you having to spend more to work on it. It's something I need to do more of, that I can't just do in a live stream like this. But on the whole, so far, at least with the basic prose prompt here, I'd say 4.1 Opus is a marginal improvement over 4 Opus, and very different from GPT-5. But still good in its own way. That would be my assessment there. Now, if we go to the more complicated prose prompt, this is the prose prompt where I give it the same scene, but with a lot more information, including several thousand words of my own work. So I can see how well does it respond to those changes. And I'm happy to say it did very well. So if we go back to those two moments that we've covered already, so you'll notice the style is quite a bit different here, and that's because I'd given it some sample chapters, I'd given it more style information, like a style sheet, I'd given it a whole bunch more guidance on who the character is and what they're feeling, all that stuff, just to kind of see how does it improve on the previous attempt, which had very little instruction. Okay, I just gave it the beats and let it go. So if we go to the same two moments, I glanced back, the hungry had gained ground. One of them, it might have been a woman once, lurched forward in that broken puppet dance they all did, mouth hanging open, revealing teeth filed to points, not by choice. The transformation did that, turned molars into fangs over the course of days. The brass warning bells would soon start. The guards had lookout posts with telescopes. They'd spot the hungry, sound the alarm, and that would be it. The gates would grind shut on their massive hinges, and Haldred would die out here in the waste, either torn apart or worse, turned into one of them. Way better writing. Way better writing. So it does seem to make a big difference how you prompt it. If you give it a lot more information, like a style sheet and samples of your writing, it will do a lot better with 4.1 Opus, at least according to this test. So that's good news. I will also say something that tends to happen So if we look at the basic prose prompt, this gave me 486 words when I asked for 500, so right on the money. And then with the novel crafter prompt, I also asked it for 500 words, and it gave me 488 words. So again, right on the money. Usually, with most models that I test this with, the novel crafter prose prompt is significantly smaller than the standard basic prose prompt. The reason for that, I actually don't know the reason why AI models tend to do this, but most models do. And I think it has something to do with the size of the prompt you're feeding into it. If you have a multiple 1,000-word prompt, for some reason it seems to say, oh, because this input was so big, we need to make the output a little smaller to save on tokens or something like that. That's the sort of vibe I get from it. Obviously, I don't know what these models are thinking or why it does that, but in this case, it didn't. So that is good news. I'll go ahead and skip the dialogue prose template and the editing prose template, because that I don't really have anything to add there. It's fine. There's nothing, again, marginal improvement over Claude 4 Opus. And as I say, with pretty much every model that I test, it does do a decent job of improving the passage that I'm asking it to edit here. But it's not perfect, and it would probably be better served to just rewrite it. So that's the editing prose prompt. Add headlines prompt. Let's read through a couple of these, because this is something I felt like GPT-5 did pretty well. They're not perfect, but they are a little bit shorter. They don't kind of conform to that standard ad template that I see all the time, where it's just like part A of the ad headline and then a colon and then part B, which is overused with so many different AI models. And for some reason, you see it all the time, but I didn't see it here with GPT-5. With 4.1, these are longer, which I don't like, but let's actually read through some of them and see if they're any better. The exiled prince discovered why his father really cast him out, and it changes everything. That one's actually not bad. If we could make this a little bit more succinct, that would be a good headline. 3 races rule the wasteland, but the 4th one isn't supposed to exist. That one's also pretty good. He thought the hungry were the worst thing outside the mountain. He was wrong. A little bit cliche, but that one's okay. What if everything your kingdom taught you about the outside world was a lie? I've seen that one a lot. The rebels told him one sentence that shattered 12 years of royal lies. That one's not too bad. Definitely a sense of curiosity about what is this one sentence. Why did the king exile his own son to face the hungry? The truth is darker than zombies. Anyway, so most of these actually are quite good. The only thing I would ask it to do as a follow-up to this prompt would be to make them a little bit more succinct while keeping the meaning. Yeah, so I'd say overall pretty good. If we compare that to GPT-5, I think 4.1 is better than GPT-5 on this particular thing. The hive obeys the queen. Who taught the prince to obey a lie? Like, a lot of these are sort of like, what is it trying to say? This is a bit confusing. It sounds poetic, sounds intriguing, but you don't actually really get what the headline is trying to say. He fled the hungry. Why did the living fear the truth more? Like part of you is like, that sounds good, but then when you think about it, like, wait, what is it trying to say? Whereas with 4.1 Opus, it's very clear. His royal blood makes him valuable to the rebels, but not for the reason he thinks. Like, that's a good curiosity inducing headline. I think that's pretty decent. The king's son was betrayed in exile. Finding out by whom changes everything. Okay, so yeah, that's a win for Claude 4.1 Opus there. It does good on the ads. So if you're a copywriter, you might want to check that one out. Email newsletter prompt. I need to just redo this. Let's just skip it. Because I think my prompt has never been great for that. And last but not least, we have the SEO article super prompt. I want to compare these. Claude 4 Opus gave us how many words? 2,000. I asked for 4,000. GPT-5 gave us 3,300. So that's better. Claude 4.1 Opus gave us 3,843. Ooh. So as far as like sticking to the word count I asked it to give me, that did a good job. Now, when I analyzed the SEO article that GPT-5 gave me, I thought it did a good job, but it felt a little bit stripped down, a lot of bullet points with very little explanation, which, you know, coming from an SEO background, that's not necessarily a bad thing. People like to just get their information in a skimmable format most of the time. But I like to have some meat on the bones. So if we look at this, what is a fantasy novel? We've got a second here. Common tropes in fantasy novels. And here we have the list. And it does give a little bit more of an explanation for each one, which is good. Steps to writing a fantasy novel. And it's using Markdown to mark the headings here, and it is getting those correct. Before you write a single word, determine who will read your fantasy book. And then we get... Okay, yeah, so this is good. So that's a win for Claude 4.1 Opus as far as writing articles goes. If that's something you do. I should probably do some live streams about my approach to SEO articles, because SEO is completely changing now. Completely changing. Thanks to AI. It's one of those industries that I got out of at the exact right time. Because I wouldn't say it's dying, but it is evolving in a big way. And I'm still doing stuff. I have a website now called Storytelling DB. DB standing for database. Storytellingdb.com. And I do have a strategy there. We'll see if it pans out. All right. So my bottom line for Claude 4.1 Opus, I'll try to get to this a little sooner, is that it is an incremental improvement on Claude 4 Opus. It is good. It is definitely not a step backward. And for most people who are writing creatively with AI, it'll probably be the best one to start with, because it'll work better out of the box than GPT-5, which I think can be a little bit... I do think GPT-5 is really good at creative writing, but I get the sense that it needs to be really wrangled, and you need to really have your prompting on point to get the results you want out of it. That's my initial impression. The last thing I was going to show you guys, which we don't have too much time to get into because I want to answer some questions here, but these are, I did run it through my automation to write 3 chapters of my book. And this is what it wrote. I'll just read you the first part. So from Claude 4 Opus, I'll skip the first paragraph here because it's usually like, that's the kind of thing I would cut out anyway. It's just setting the scene. So we have the door creaked open. Emerald slipped inside. A crown of winter berries balanced in her hands, dark red against white frost, the berries gleaming like drops of blood on snow. I found these growing near their old well. Emerald's voice carried its usual gentleness. The frost makes them prettier, don't you think? Una reached for the crown, then pulled her hand back. Her fingers still shook. So yeah, it's a decent start there. But Claude 4 Opus... the white dress hung loose on her frame, too loose. These past months had carved away what little softness she carried. She pulled at the fabric, adjusting it the way it fell across her shoulders. The material was rough spun wool, practical for winter, nothing like the silks her mother had worn. But it was clean and new, and that was enough. Behind her, the door creaked open. You're going to wear a hole through the mirror if you keep staring. Emma crossed the chamber, and crown of winter berries and evergreen balanced in her hands. The deep red of the berries caught what little sunlight filtered through the narrow window. I swear you've checked your reflection a dozen times. Only half that. Una's voice came out steadier than her hands. So I think this is, again, better, but not by much. Like, you'd have to really, like, watch it. For these 3 chapters. Claude 4 Opus gave me about 5,000 words. 4.1 Opus gave me about the same. GPT-5 gave me 10,000 words, so it did a lot more. If we read what it gave us here, Amaret circled in front, adjusting the narrow ribbon at Una's waist. Breathe, she whispered. Not like a rabbit, like a queen. I'm not a queen. The words came out thin. Una swallowed and tried again. Not yet. Belphoebe arched a brow. Titles aside, today you rule this keep. She nudged the window latch with a knuckle. You should see the courtyard. Gloriana's folks stand with ours. Even a badger, I swear. He carried a sprig in his mouth, Amaret added. Looked quite pleased with himself. Una smiled. It left as quick as it came. Her hands shook anyway. She pressed them against the worn wood of the sill until it stopped. There is something kind of weird and off about this, but it's also just going into places where AI doesn't typically go. Like it's a little less predictable in a good way, if that makes sense. So that's just my initial thoughts there. But I do think, if I'm being honest, I do think Claude 4.1 Opus is the more stable of the two, where, and by that I mean it's going to follow your instructions and give you something that's decent right out of the gate and do it well. Whereas GPT-5 does give you some real gems at times, but maybe requires a bit more work to get it to a finished, polished state. That would be probably my bottom line there. So with that in mind, that's going to be pretty much it for my analysis of what I've got here. So you're welcome to leave if you want, but I'm going to answer a couple of questions that people have in the chat until that point. Go ahead and change my perspective here. So let's see what people are saying. So if you have questions that you want answered, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will try to get to them. Avaris, sorry if I'm butchering your name, said, I tried both Claude and GPT-5, but my take is this: neither of them are good at initial ideation, improving ideas, filling in gaps. Yes, I should pretend to be a chatbot and sell ideas. They can be good for ideation, but only in the sense that it is sparking your imagination, because your imagination, you're right, is going to be better. But sometimes you need just a little something to get you going. And once you're going, you're good. AI can be good for that. But also can, like, random word generators can be good for that too. So it's not necessarily a good thing. Will you review any other Chinese models like Kimi K2? I found that they have a lot of creativity compared to Western models. I have not looked at Kimi K2 yet. I'd be happy to at least take a look. If I see anything interesting, anything that kind of that is a major discovery, then sure, I might make a video about it. Charlie says, I find 4.1 does a better job keeping track of little things, small details, clever callbacks, multiple character consistency, etc. compared to 4.0. And the default prose isn't annoying. Yeah, I'd say that is probably true. When writing a new scene for an existing manuscript, 4.1 is better than 4.0 at bringing in detail, subtext, nuance, and just getting the facts right, especially from 100K plus word manuscripts. That's good to know. Seems like that is the sentiment overall. Hayden Mill says, hi, all. Just joined. What seems to be the verdict? GPT-5 greater than Opus 4.1? I'd say different. Is different. I have a feeling, though, that people are still going to prefer Opus for the most part for creative writing, but it depends on the situation. Does Claude still have glitches like white knuckles? Yeah, I'm sure it does. Like, keep in mind, anytime they release a new model, it's still being trained on the same old data that gave it all of those AI-isms and glitches and stuff in the first place. And so I feel like iterations like going from 4.0 to 4.1, those can often be good at fixing some of those things because they're improving the model. They're not redoing it, right? Okay. Sino says, I just had my root canal fixed. Don't know if it's the writing or the tooth, but it doesn't sound better than 4 Opus. Like I said, incremental improvement. A lot of people here seem to think it is better at bringing in subtext and nuance, which is definitely something that AI struggles with generally, and wouldn't necessarily be evident in on a paragraph by paragraph analysis. That's just one of those things that you got to kind of figure out over time as you use it. But I would say it's definitely not it's not worse, and it's not more expensive than 4.0, so might as well upgrade. Hi guys, missed the start of the stream. Did Jason talk about temperature settings for each model? No, I have not done that. Usually when I run these tests, I run it at 1, because I'm trying to compare them all fairly at 1. If you do adjust the settings, and I definitely would say with GPT-5 you should definitely play around with the temperature settings, probably lower it to get it to adhere to your prompts better. It can definitely make a difference to play with temperature settings, but in my tests I try to see how well can they perform out of the box without any crazy adjustments that need happening, because that's a good assessment. Okay. This GPT-5 seems a bit schizophrenic. Yeah, maybe. That's why I think maybe turning down the temperature a little bit would be good. In fact, you guys want to maybe try that? Let me pull up my prompts. Test prompts and open a router. Okay. I'll just go to a new chat. And here inside of Open Router, we're going to turn down the temperature. So it's at 1 by default. Let's go to 7. And then I'll just run one of the prompts. Let's do the basic prose prompt. And we'll read those 2 moments that I read earlier, just to see if it's any better. Assuming it decides to run. Well, while that's going, oh wait, you guys can't see the screen. Okay, so let me get to these questions. So when using Claude API on Open Router, can you still use projects? Not in the sense you're thinking. That's not really how it works. But you can go into the system prompt here and put, this is essentially the same as putting in your instructions into a Claude project. You put it into the system prompt and you can get something similar. Let's see. No response generated. That's weird. I haven't gotten that before. Let's try that again. Yeah, so I'd agree with this sentiment from Vincent, who says GPT-5 is often a bit too poetic to the point where you don't even know what it is trying to say. I'd agree with that. That's where I'm thinking maybe pulling down the temperature might be helpful. But let's just see how that goes. Adam asks, if you could only subscribe to one platform to pair with Novel Crafter, which would you choose outside of using Open Router or pay-per-click? So it doesn't really matter either way, because or unless you're talking about the chatbot, you're talking about the chatbot, like which chatbot to use. Because I wouldn't use either. I'd use Perplexity. Because you can get the Claude models and GPT-5 inside of Perplexity. And then, of course, you can access any of the models that you want from any of the APIs or from OpenRouter, and that's pay as you go, but it's usually not a whole lot unless, except for Opus. Opus is expensive. How much of silver do I need to do before I am ready for gold? Where should I start? So I assume you're talking about my Story Hacker silver and gold groups. The silver group is just meant to sort of dip your toe into things and see if you like it. The gold group is much more engaged, has much more going on in terms of courses and the like. And we're currently doing a book in a month challenge where we're writing a book in the month of August. And then next month we're going to be doing a writing without AI challenge where we write a short story where we don't use AI for the actual prose. So we actually write the prose ourselves. You can dictate it if you want. But we do a short story that way so that we can submit it to writers of the future. And it's a great way to improve your own skill as an author, because AI is only as good as the author wielding it. And so it's important for me to help the people in my community actually get better as authors. And so we do that every quarter now. So that's something starting in September. So yeah, you get the initial course inside of the silver group and you get some of my templates. And if you like that, you can say, okay, yeah, I want to upgrade. And if you're really serious about becoming an author and getting to the first 20 books published as fast as possible, the gold group is the best way to do that. All right. Next question. Well, actually, let me pause there, and because we did get some results here. First of all, it gave it to me in 2 giant paragraphs, which plus this little paragraph, which I don't count, which I don't like. But let's look. He risked a look over his shoulder when the wind shifted. Out of the horizon, scattered along the rune spines and the salt pans, figures moved with the hungry's wrong cadence, all angles and lurch, as if the strings that guided them were jerked by an impatient hand. At least 24 he could count without squinting. Their skin a wind-scoured gray, hardly separable from the stone, except when the light glanced and made them glisten like wet shale. Between them and him, the land offered little mercy. Flats that gave speed, low shelves of basalt that broke, not hid a man. He knew their voices without hearing them, the clack and whisper that had followed the expedition for 3 dead days until numbers pried courage apart. Policy rose up in his mind like a wall. Valden takes no doors when the hungry are at the threshold. It was inked on guild papers and spoken over morning bread. It had saved lives and doomed them. Okay, so I don't like this. I think it was better when it was its normal creativity. This is still trying to wax poetic, but doing so in a way that just feels like it's rambling. So, in this case, I would say 4.1 Opus is better. But it's still good. Like, I don't want to give up on GPT-5 entirely because it still has a lot of good stuff. It's a little bit difficult for me to kind of figure out what, how I would use it practically. I found that building my automations, which I'm working on, is a great way for me to really refine my prompts, because if I can get it working in an automated format, it's like easier to tell, easier to see the results of making tweaks like that. Anyway, let's go back to this. All right. And yeah, so Vincent says, I really like GPT-5 for world building because it is so creative, but for the actual writing, it can be too vague. I actually think that's a great use case. We got to remember that these models are not Like they excel at some things and are bad at others. And so things like, I know a lot of people use the Gemini models for editing because they seem to work better for editing. Whereas the Claude models are used more for writing. And maybe now GPT-5 would be a great one to use for world building or brainstorming. I would agree with that. I think that'd be a good place to start. Alex says, I use Claude. It's unmatched from day one. Mostly I agree with you, but it depends on the use case. And I would advise you not to get too set in that thinking because something new could come along that totally changes everything. Have you used AI in large token windows, like searching something in a book beyond 100,000 tokens? Because I am editing and sometimes I want to know something about my characters in the book. I'm not sure, but not sure. Yes, I have. It is inefficient. First of all, you're going to increase your costs like crazy by doing that. It is better to create a summary of your book, like run each chapter through a summarizing prompt where you condense it to one paragraph and then have that outline of your book included, and any other information you want. Like create a story Bible, essentially. That's going to shorten the amount of text that you have in your prompt by a significant margin and actually make it easier for the AI to scan through it and find the things that you need it to do. Otherwise, it sort of waters down the prompt. You've given it too much that it's like finding a needle in a haystack. Even if technically it's supposed to be within its context parameter, we've found that by shortening your prompts where possible through like creating a story Bible or just a summary of your plot, it's actually better for the AI to understand what's going on. So yeah, you don't want to water down your prompt. I like Opus 4.1 with temperature at 0.7 or top P at 0.5 to 0.7. It's just really expensive. GPT is way cheaper if you can adjust the parameters to give you outputs. So like, yeah, I like that. I would say that cost is a huge factor. The automation that I have here, where is it for this, where it's writing a full chapter here, this automation costs me about $1 per chapter. And that's a lot. So for a 40 chapter book, that's $40 I'm paying there. Now, granted, if it's reliably good, $40 is nothing. Like if I can get something that's comparable to a ghostwriter, like a ghostwriter will cost me thousands of dollars, right? But yeah. By the way, great work. We appreciate everything you do. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Adam asks, what's the difference between Perplexity and Open Router? They're kind of not the same at all. Open Router is just a place where you can come to test any of the models, and you use it like an API where you connect it to things like Novel Crafter or Raptorite, or even Make. I use it inside of Make for my automations. I'll plug it in there. And that's usually how I use it. I rarely use it outside of testing and outside of pulling it into other programs. But Perplexity is essentially a chatbot like ChatGPT, but it's got more features and it could do more. And I think it's better at what it does. Plus, it has not all the models. Like Open Router. Open Router gives you way more flexibility with the number of models, but you do have Claude 4 Sonnet, GPT-5, Gemini 2.5 Pro. You got the heavy hitters: Claude Sonnet 4 Thinking, Grok 4, O3. And then if you're on the Max plan, which is $200 a month, so most people won't, then you get Claude Opus and O3 Pro. But Perplexity is my everyday go-to chatbot that I use for just everyday stuff. I don't use it for writing because there are other better programs to do that. But as a catch-all for everything else, Perplexity is my go-to. And I'll be doing a video about that very soon, actually. Okay. Let's see. Can you use Perplexity within OpenRouter? You can use Perplexity's models in OpenRouter with web search. So kind of. Is it as simple? Not really. So is Story Bible these days just a summary of your story? It used to be a collection of info on your stories for a series, I think. Kind of. A summary of your story is just a simple version of a Story Bible, but you can go much more. You can create a whole wiki around your story. In context of AI, I use a Story Bible which as just a summary of what's happened in the past and information about the characters and world building, any important world building. So you just create all this stuff out. And if you're writing a book from scratch, you create all of that yourself before you start writing. And if you're writing like a sequel or something like that to a book that you already have, and rather than just having to draft all that stuff up from scratch, you can have an AI analyze your previous book and come up with a lot of that information itself. A lot of people are looking forward to Gemini 3.0 Pro. Yeah. The Gemini models are generally pretty good, although I don't use them for writing. At least not this kind of writing. It's pretty good for things like YouTube scripts, which makes sense because Google owns YouTube, right? Trying 5 different models on Novel Crafter and OpenRouter. All of them had a character jumping off a ladder when continuing the story. Not terribly creative and a little dramatic. Yeah. This is why it's important for you to be the guide of the story. Right? You have to decide where it goes. Since GPT-5 got mixed reviews, do you think that around now, if Google, Claude, or another AI company releases a model and it's good, it would take the spotlight? Depends on what you mean by take the spotlight. Like, as far as I'm concerned, OpenAI and the GPT models have lost their initial market advantage for the most part, because Google has done really good and Anthropic has done really good with their models. The only thing ChatGPT has at this point is brand recognition, because it was the first. But I think anybody who's in this space knows that there are better models, depending on your use case, from other companies, and that you shouldn't just assume that OpenAI is better. So they've had a bit of a rocky launch for GPT-5. I have no doubt, like if you look at GPT-4 compared to GPT-4o, 4o is so much better, and that was just an iteration and improvement upon GPT-4. So I have absolutely no doubt that OpenAI is going to release like a 5.1 or 5.0 or whatever they end up naming these things, and those will be significantly better. Probably they'll be better at following instructions and whatnot. So we'll just have to wait and see. It doesn't really matter. Like, all this competition, it's good for us, right? It means that we're getting better and better results because these people are trying to improve on each other all the time. If you write something that is not PG-13, Grok, otherwise Opus is best for writing. Otherwise, Opus is best for writing. Yeah, okay, so if you want something that's not PG-13, that's a little more not safe for work, Grok is an option. Even it won't go too far, though. The best one I found for not safe for work content is actually the Muse model inside of Sudowrite, but you have to have a Sudowrite subscription to access that. I have not tried the open source OSS yet, but in my experience, the open source stuff is not going to be as good as the heavyweight stuff so far. but I can give it a try and see if it happens to be good at creative writing. Cena says, I found that if you tell OpenAI models to write crisp prose, it sticks to that even better than Claude. It's very good in summarizing and taking fluff out. That's good to know. I get the sense from GPT-5 that it is probably very versatile. And that's why prompting is going to be important for it, because even if it doesn't seem to be good out of the box, maybe if you added a few things in your prompt, it would do much better. Like just asking it to, like you said, to write crisp prose or to write at an 8th grade reading level and not be so poetic, you know? You work on that stuff, maybe it'll do better. But that stuff like that takes a while for everybody to sort of figure out where its strengths are. And the purpose of my test is to figure out how well they do out of the box. Jeremy says, I like to use models for brainstorming. Does Novel Crafter have a separate section for this? If you have the artisan plan, this is the $14 Novel Crafter plan, you get access to their chatbot, which essentially allows you to do brainstorming with the codex that Novel Crafter has inside of it. So it gives you all of the context from your codex and your book and everything that you want it to have, and you can still treat it like a chatbot. So it's useful. Otherwise, you could also just create a project inside of ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude and get similar results that way. But yeah. Sid, sorry I came here late. So what's the conclusion y'all come up with? It's a matter of preference. I would say 4.1 is still probably your safest bet for creative writing, but GPT-5 is really good for some stuff. In some cases sounds a lot better than Claude 4.1. All right, JS Rock, I already talked a little bit about steamy scenarios. I would experiment with Grok or Mistral, but there's a tool called Pseudowrite, and they have their own proprietary model called Muse, and that one seems to be really good for not safe for work content. Doesn't seem to be. I've tested it. It's good for that specific. Just Rise and Grind says, I can't wait when the open source models become as good as the closed ones. Yeah, me too, man. Hasn't happened yet. Well, I should say the closed ones probably will always have an edge over the open source ones, but eventually they'll all be so good that it won't matter so much. What future model are you looking forward to the most so far? I don't know. Probably whoever can create a take a model like Llama 4 and create a fine-tuned version of that is specific to creative writing. If you can do that, which nobody has done before except for the folks at Pseudowrite, and it's closed to their own platform, but if you can get something that is trained specifically to write well, that is what I would most look forward to. But nobody's doing that because nobody cares about authors. They care about coders and, helping out in the workplace and in the tech industry and all of that. Does Muse beat them all? No. Muse is very good, but you have to use it in a specific way, in my experience. It is not as versatile as any of these models. But in certain use cases, it is very good at prose. Definitely better than most. But these newer models like GPT-5 and 4.5 and Opus 4.1 are almost as good at the prose level that it almost doesn't matter if you're using Muse or not. The gap between closed source and open source is closing. Yeah, it is a little bit. especially compared to a couple years ago. JS Rock asks, do writers get the same backlash AI hate that AI artists get? There just seems to be so much hate toward AI. Unfortunately, yes. There's quite a bit of backlash. The thing about AI writing, though, is you can hide it better. It's funny because I get people commenting about like how AI just writes crap. And I'm just like, maybe back in the day it did. The people that say that I can always recognize AI writing, I just have to chuckle at that, because I guarantee you that you're reading things that are AI generated or AI assisted in some way, and you have no idea. You would just have no idea, because in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing with AI, there's no way you are recognizing that. It's going to sound just as good as any other person. But there are going to be lots and lots of books put out there by people that don't know what they're doing, and the AI does sound terrible, and that is what you're reading. That makes it seem like you can obviously read anything that was AI generated. So there's a lot of hate out there. I generally don't recommend people disclose that they use AI except when prompted to by Amazon. Do be honest. But Amazon does not reveal that you used AI in any capacity. And if you're using it from an assisted point of view, like using it for research or brainstorming and stuff like that, doesn't need to be disclosed. Pseudo-write Muse or Novel Crafter and Open Router? Depends on your workflow. I'm going to be doing a bunch of videos on both in the near future, because I think they're both good and you can get good results from both. It just depends on the workflow you prefer and how much control you want. Stuff like that. Jeremy says, found some of the Chinese models are fun to work with because they come up with some weird stuff. I could see that. What do you think about the prediction of AGI in 2027? I think that's too soon. But what do I know? When it comes to AGI, I am among the more skeptical that true AGI is going to come anytime soon. You might be able to get some models that imitate humans so well that it's hard to tell the difference. But at least with models that we have right now, you always need a human to kind of guide things and get the process started. It's like, think of AI as a mech suit, and you always need a human inside of the mech suit. And I feel like that's going to continue to be the case for a while. But I may be wrong. I may be totally wrong. I know a lot of people think AGI is coming sooner than later. That's fine if you think that. I'm also, not to get too like spiritual or woo-woo here, I don't think that AI will ever have a soul, and I think that's going to make a difference. Now I know a lot of you, I probably lost half of you just right there, but I think there is something to that. There is certainly something to the idea of a soul, and if you want a good place to start with that, the gateway drug for me was a book called After by Bruce Grayson, Bruce Grayson, which is the scientific study of near-death experiences. Go read that; it'll blow your mind. But we'll stop there. Let's see. D. Williams says, I quite like Quinn. Yeah, I need to test those a little bit more. Life 77 says, I'm loving these live shows. Please don't stop. Great. I'm glad you like them. I do plan on doing more of them. I plan on doing a lot of live writing. So if you're into that, we'll be doing more of those in the near future. When do you think AI will be adopted by everybody? Certainly it won't be adopted by everybody in our lifetime. But like, I'm thinking about it like from the perspective of my daughters who are young. They will never know a time without AI in their lifetime. And to them, it'll just be normal to go to school and be using AI as a tutor, or using to learning how to use it properly in writing, and what makes good. They're going to enter a completely different environment around their education, and I don't know if it's going to be better or worse, but it will be different. And given that they have that kind of upbringing, like, I don't see them having the same problem with AI that people do today, because it's just they don't know what it's like without it. There was a study that was done recently by BookBub, where they asked if authors were using AI in any capacity. So not necessarily to write the whole thing for them, but if they're using it for research or brainstorming or editing or anything, like, are they using it? They found that 46% of authors that responded are already using it somehow, which is a lot more than I would have expected, and probably a lot more than most people wanted to admit. But it does seem that a lot of people are quietly adopting these AI tools, at least in certain areas where they find it's the most useful. Like, I find tools like Perplexity for research are, like, I could not live without Perplexity now. Just the amount of time and headache it saves me to research a topic. Even something as simple as, like, trying to troubleshoot some tech issue that I'm having. I used to have to, like, scour the web through Google to try and find the answers to whatever problem. Like, it's probably a small problem, but AI can just go in there and find it instantly. And stuff like that, where the real pain points are for people, that's where AI is going to be adopted first, and it's going to be those are going to be the gateway drugs for people. Now, I don't think there's going to be a lot of widespread adoption for using it for, like, the entire writing process, because a lot of people get into writing because they like the writing themselves, and that is totally fine. I like the ideation process. I like the outlining process the most. And I do enjoy, I do want to become better as a writer. So I do writing. That's just me. Like, I'm the one writing. But I also know that I have more books in my head than I could possibly write myself. So why not use AI or even ghostwriters to help with some of that? Those are just my thoughts. What's the latest from traditional publishers? Would they publish something very fine-tuned after your style with the original story and characters? Well, we know that the traditional publishers are getting into AI themselves. They're probably going to be creating quite a few of their, like, once AI gets to the point where they can create books themselves without much human oversight, they will probably be doing some of that themselves, because it saves them money. And it could be a good way for them to test out ideas and stuff and see, like, what does the market want and whatnot. So I do fully expect the traditional publishers to embrace AI at some point. Some of them put on a show of not doing it, but they're still using AI internally for, like, productivity reasons. If not for actual writing or anything, but, like, doing things like writing a first draft of a book description. You could definitely see stuff like that happening. Wherever their biggest pain points are. Again, everybody's got a pain point that AI can solve. That's going to be the reason why people adopt AI. And DS9 says, the more human the input, the higher the quality it is, be it art or writing or coding. That correlation is always present. And I 100% agree with this. I don't care how good the AI gets. I will die on this hill. It doesn't matter how good the AI gets. An AI plus a human that knows what they're doing will always be better than the same AI with a human that doesn't know what they're doing. Meaning, the better a storyteller you are, the more experienced you are, the more you've written, the more you have educated yourself, et cetera, the better off you'll be, no matter what. Because business has always been humans using tools competing against other humans using tools. And now we just all have better tools, but everybody has the same tools, right? So there's got to be something that sets the human apart. So I will always advocate for increasing your own skills and getting experience and learning and getting mentors and writing and doing all this stuff, because an experienced storyteller will always be able to get better results with the AI than a non-experienced storyteller using the same AI, even if the AI is amazing at what it does. I can guarantee that will always be the case. I like the mech suit metaphor. Yeah, that's how I think of AI. It's an extension of the author. It is not replacing the author, and it never has, right? Those of us that have been using it know it's not a replacement tool. It is an extension tool of the author. It's a magnifying glass. Okay. I gotta wrap this up soon because we've been here for an hour and 15 minutes, but I'll try to get a few more. Hang on. Some chat about souls. I'll skip over that for now. So Sirski says, I checked on an AI detector sentences produced by Claude and by GPT. To me, Claude sounded more human-like, but the AI detector concluded that GPT was human and Claude definitely AI. That is probably because they haven't adapted their algorithms for GPT-5 yet. Because anytime you get a new model, it writes differently, so they have to adjust their detection algorithms. Give it a couple months, I'm sure it'll identify it just as well. Do you think the market will get saturated with how easier making books is and will become? Of course it will. But that's not actually an issue. Market saturation is never an issue. Now, granted, when in the early days, when there was nobody around, you could get an advantage. But market saturation is just something we assume is always the case. And in order to get past market saturation, all you have to do is put in a little bit more effort than the other people. Most people think that everybody is putting in effort when in fact most people are not. And in the case of AI, a lot of people are going to see that as an opportunity to try and make some money without putting in an effort. Whereas all of us have access to the same tools now. So if I put in more effort than the other person, then suddenly I have the advantage again. So all you have to do is, like, do a little marketing, write more books, put more effort into making the books quality, whatever you have to do, just put more effort into it. And you'll immediately rise to the top 1% of the market. Because the market was already saturated long before AI came around. We know that because Amazon became pay to play. They required ads. The presence of ads is how you know that a market is already saturated. If there are no ads, then that means that they're in the early stages of things being adopted. Once you have ads, then it becomes pay to play. So in order to win when you are paying for ads, you have to have a good product. You have to have something that people are actually buying. If you don't, then nobody's going to buy your ads, and you're going to turn your ads off because they're not working. So that's going to happen to a lot of people. And already there are millions of books. Even before AI, there were millions of books added on Amazon every year. And only the top couple thousand probably got seen by anybody. And it's not as hard as you would think to rise to that level. It just takes just a little bit of effort, and suddenly you can you just jump immediately to the top 1%. So all right, that was probably a good soapbox to end on. Am I still using autocrit? Yeah, a little bit. I know I haven't made many videos about autocorrect, but they're a good tool. Cool. Yeah, looks like that's the about it for the questions. So I'll go ahead and end it there. Thank you so much for showing up and hanging out. And I will see you soon. I don't know when I'm doing my next live stream, but I do plan on doing more in the future.